London, spring, 1818. The grand ballroom at Hartfield House blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their flames dancing in crystal chandeliers that cast golden patterns across marble floors, polished to mirror brightness. The air carried the mingled scents of hothouse roses, expensive perfumes, and the subtle musk of beeswax, while the orchestra played a lilting waltz that seemed to make even the walls shimmer with anticipation. Near one of the massive marble columns, the formidable Earl of Lyndhurst stood as a dark and silent figure, his sharp gaze surveying the room with a coldness that suggested he found the glittering event a tedious necessity. Beatrice Flora Sutton stood in her customary position near the potted palms that flanked the eastern terrace doors, a location she had claimed through 6 long seasons. At 24 years of age, she had become a quiet fixture of these events, a presence that guests stepped around without truly seeing, their eyes sliding past her to find more vibrant attractions. She wore the mask of propriety well, hiding the sting of being overlooked behind a face of calm indifference. Tonight, as with every night, that attraction was her sister, Lydia. If stories of love found in the most unexpected places move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You won't want to miss what happens next. Across the crowded ballroom, Lydia Sutton held court like a young queen surveying her kingdom. At 19, in only her first season, she had already received 4 serious proposals and turned down 8 others with graceful regret. Her beauty was the kind that stopped conversations, making even hardened rakes forget their carefully practiced charm. Golden curls caught the candlelight like spun sunlight. Her porcelain skin glowed with the flush of youth, and her cornflower blue eyes sparkled with the knowledge of her own power. Beatrice felt no resentment toward her sister. That would require believing she deserved something different, and she had long since accepted the lessons in decorum that society had taught her through 6 years. She was the practical sister, the intelligent one, the woman who would eventually become the beloved aunt to Lydia's children. It was a comfortable enough fate, she told herself, watching as another besotted young baron claimed Lydia's hand for the next dance. Lady Constantia Worthington swept past Beatrice's corner with her daughter Arabella in tow, their voices carrying despite their attempts at discretion. 6 seasons, Lady Constantia murmured behind her painted fan. One must admire Miss Beatrice's persistence, if nothing else, though I confess I cannot fathom why she continues to subject herself to this annual humiliation. Perhaps she hopes her sister's glow will cast some favorable light in her direction, Arabella replied, with false sympathy. Though one would think after 24 years, she might accept that some flowers bloom while others simply fade into the wallpaper. Beatrice kept her expression carefully neutral, her fingers tightening on her own fan. She had perfected this particular role over 6 long years, the art of appearing not to hear while every cruel word carved itself into memory. The trick was to focus on something else entirely, to let her mind drift to more interesting subjects than the catalogue of her own supposed inadequacies. She found herself studying the Pityridium aquilinum specimens in the brass planters beside her. Common bracken ferns, hardly exotic enough for a ballroom of this caliber, yet someone on the Hartfield staff clearly possessed botanical knowledge. The fronds were perfectly healthy, their positioning calculated to provide decorative greenery while requiring minimal light. Practical and resilient, Beatrice felt a kinship with the plants. Fascinating, are they not? The voice came from directly beside her, masculine and warm with genuine interest. Beatrice started slightly, turning to find herself face to face with a gentleman she recognized immediately, though they had never been formally introduced. Felix Arthur Bainbridge, second son of the late Marquis of Westmont, was everything a romantic figure should be. At 24, he possessed the kind of easy charm that made strangers feel like old friends. His auburn hair caught the light as he moved, and his hazel eyes held a glint of mischief. He wore his evening clothes with a relaxed elegance that suggested his perfect cravat was a mere happy accident. He was also, Beatrice knew from observation, one of the most sought-after gentlemen in London. Not for his title, which he would never inherit, but for his substantial fortune and his reputation as a safe flirt. Mothers adored him because he never formed serious attachments. Daughters pursued him because the chase itself was entertainment. He had danced with hundreds of young ladies and courted precisely none, which made his presence beside Beatrice, speaking to her about ferns, utterly inexplicable. "I beg your pardon?" Beatrice managed, certain she must have misheard. "The ferns," Felix clarified, gesturing toward the planters with genuine enthusiasm. "I noticed you studying them with what appeared to be scientific fascination rather than mere appreciation for their decorative qualities. I confess myself intrigued. Do you have an interest in botany, Miss Sutton?" He knew her name. Felix Bainbridge, who could have chosen any of the dozens of fresh-faced debutantes currently watching their exchange with shock, knew her name and was asking about her interests. "I do," Beatrice heard herself reply, the role she played making the response automatic despite her confusion. "These are Pteridium aquilinum, common bracken ferns, not particularly exotic, but remarkably resilient. They can survive in conditions that would destroy more delicate species." The words emerged before she could stop them, the kind of detailed response that usually prompted polite gentlemen to make hasty excuses and flee. Beatrice braced herself for the inevitable retreat. Instead, Felix's face lit up with delight. "You know the Latin classifications," he said, and the wonder in his voice sounded entirely genuine. "Miss Sutton, that is extraordinary. Tell me, have you studied other aspects of natural philosophy, or is your expertise limited to the plant kingdom?" Beatrice stared at him, searching for signs of mockery and finding none. His hazel eyes held only sincere interest and something else, something that looked almost like relief, as though he had been searching for precisely this conversation all evening. "I have studied what I could access," she said carefully, still waiting for the trap to spring. "My father's library contains several volumes on natural history, and I have read whatever accounts of scientific expeditions I could acquire, though I confess most of my knowledge comes from observation rather than formal education." "Observation," Felix repeated, savoring the word. "You mean you have taught yourself through direct study of the natural world? That is infinitely more valuable than rote memorization of textbooks, in my opinion. Tell me, what other subjects have you explored through this methodology?" Before Beatrice could formulate a response, the current waltz concluded. The orchestra paused for a moment, allowing dancers to clear the floor and new partnerships to form. In that brief silence, Felix's next words carried across the ballroom with devastating clarity. "Miss Sutton, would you do me the extraordinary honor of dancing the next waltz with me? I find myself desperately curious to hear your thoughts on pteridophytes and whatever other fascinating subjects you might care to discuss." The whispers began immediately, spreading through the assembled guests like wildfire through dry brush. Beatrice felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes turning toward her corner, felt the shock and speculation that rippled outward from Felix's simple invitation. Felix Bainbridge, who had passed by Lydia without a second glance, was asking the Wallflower to dance. Across the ballroom, Beatrice caught sight of her sister's face. Lydia looked utterly bewildered but not angry, her expression suggesting she had just witnessed something that defied all natural laws. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Lydia offered a small, encouraging smile, her own cornflower eyes softening with a sudden, uncharacteristic depth of understanding. "I would be honored," Beatrice said quietly, placing her gloved hand in Felix's extended palm. As he led her onto the dance floor, Beatrice became acutely aware of the scrutiny following their every movement. She had danced before, of course, the obligatory sets with her brother-in-law and the occasional cousin who felt duty-bound to save her from complete humiliation. But never like this. Never with every eye in the room tracking her path. Felix seemed entirely unconcerned by the attention. He positioned his hand at her waist with perfect propriety, maintaining the exact distance required by decorum, and when the music began, he guided her into the steps with effortless skill. "I must apologize," he said as they turned, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I have created something of a spectacle, which was not my intention. I simply saw you examining those ferns with such genuine interest, and I could not resist the opportunity to speak with someone who might actually discuss substantive topics rather than the usual ballroom inanities." "You need not apologize," Beatrice replied, though her voice trembled slightly with nervousness. "I am merely surprised. You could have chosen anyone for this dance." "I chose the most interesting person in the room," Felix said simply. "Though I suspect you do not believe that, given the way you are looking at me as though I might be suffering from a fever that has affected my judgment." Despite herself, Beatrice laughed. The sound startled her, genuine amusement bubbling up before she could contain it. When was the last time she had laughed at a ball? She could not remember. "Forgive me," she said. "It is merely that in 6 seasons, no gentleman has ever described me as interesting. Practical? Yes. Well-mannered, certainly. But interesting is a new addition to the catalogue." "Then every gentleman you have encountered in those 6 seasons has been a fool," Felix said with such conviction that Beatrice found herself believing him, at least for the duration of one waltz. "Tell me, Miss Sutton, what do you think of the current debate regarding crop rotation and soil enrichment? I have recently acquired an estate in Gloucestershire and find myself woefully ignorant of modern agricultural practices." The question was so unexpected, so far removed from typical ballroom conversation, that Beatrice answered without thinking. "The 4-field system shows promising results when properly implemented," she said. "Rotating wheat, turnips, barley, and clover allows the soil to recover nitrogen between grain crops while maintaining productivity. Though I have read accounts suggesting that certain root vegetables may provide even better soil restoration than turnips, the research remains inconclusive." As she spoke, Beatrice watched Felix's face for signs of boredom or regret. Instead, he looked fascinated, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine interest. They discussed agricultural reform throughout the entire waltz, moving seamlessly from crop rotation to land enclosure debates to the potential benefits of mechanized farming equipment. It was the most extraordinary conversation Beatrice had experienced in 6 years of attending social events. When the music ended, Felix bowed with perfect grace. "Miss Sutton, you have made this evening infinitely more enlightening than I anticipated. Might I call upon you and your family tomorrow afternoon? I find myself eager to continue our discussion, and perhaps you might recommend some of those scientific texts you mentioned." "I would be delighted," Beatrice said, and meant it. As Felix escorted her back toward the edge of the ballroom, Beatrice noticed her mother materializing from the crowd, her face a study in barely contained shock. Lady Margaret Sutton had attended 6 seasons' worth of balls, watching her elder daughter fade into the decorative background. The sight of Beatrice returning from a waltz with Felix Bainbridge appeared to have temporarily robbed her of speech. "Mrs. Sutton," Felix said, bowing to Beatrice's mother with easy charm. "Your daughter is a remarkable woman. I hope you will permit me to call tomorrow afternoon to continue our acquaintance." "Of course," Lady Margaret managed, her voice slightly strangled. "We would be most honored, Mr. Bainbridge." Felix smiled, nodded to both women, and disappeared back into the crowd. The moment he was out of earshot, Lady Margaret gripped Beatrice's arm with surprising force. "What just happened?" she demanded. "Felix Bainbridge danced with you. Felix Bainbridge, who has never shown serious interest in anyone, asked permission to call tomorrow. Beatrice, what did you say to him?" "We discussed agricultural reform and pteridophytes," Beatrice replied honestly. Her mother stared at her as though she had begun speaking ancient Greek. "You discussed what?" "Ferns, mother, and crop rotation." He seemed genuinely interested. Lady Margaret opened and closed her mouth several times, clearly struggling to reconcile this information with everything she knew about courtship and social success. Finally, she simply shook her head. "Well," she said faintly, I suppose if it works, I shall not question the means." Across the ballroom, unnoticed by Beatrice or her bewildered mother, another man watched the scene with an expression that suggested he had just witnessed something far more significant than a simple dance. Jasper Nicholas Bainbridge, Earl of Lyndhurst and elder brother to the charming Felix, stood perfectly still near one of the massive marble columns that supported the ballroom ceiling. At 27, he cut an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a presence that commanded attention without requiring charm. His dark hair was precisely arranged, his evening clothes impeccably tailored, and his gray eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who missed very little. Those eyes were currently fixed on his brother with an intensity that bordered on dangerous. Lady Helena Marchwood, a widow of 40 years who had known the Bainbridge family since the boys were children, drifted to Jasper's side with the subtle grace of someone who understood when to intrude and when to observe. "Your brother has made an interesting choice for the evening," she remarked, her voice carefully neutral. Jasper's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He has danced with Miss Sutton." "The elder Miss Sutton," Lady Helena clarified unnecessarily, "not the diamond that everyone expected him to pursue. How very unlike Felix to choose the wallflower over the belle." "Beatrice Sutton is not a wallflower," Jasper said, and the sharp edge in his voice made Lady Helena's eyebrows rise. "She is intelligent, observant, and more genuinely interesting than any woman in this room. Only fools cannot see it." "My dear boy," Lady Helena said slowly, studying Jasper's face with the attention of someone solving a particularly intriguing puzzle. "How long have you been watching Miss Beatrice Sutton?" Jasper did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the spot where Felix had returned Beatrice to her mother, where she now stood, looking pleasantly bewildered by the evening's unexpected turn. 2 years, he finally admitted, his voice low enough that only Lady Helena could hear. "Since the dinner at Lady Ashford's house in 1816, when Miss Beatrice made a devastatingly insightful observation about the Corn Laws and no one heard her because they were all watching her sister." Lady Helena's expression shifted to something between sympathy and exasperation. 2 years you have watched her from afar, and you said nothing? Jasper, for a man of your intelligence, that seems remarkably foolish." "What would I have said?" Jasper's voice held a trace of bitterness. "I am not Felix. I do not possess charm or easy wit. I manage estates and investments and sit through tedious parliamentary sessions. Women find me dull, Lady Helena. They always have. What could I offer someone like Miss Beatrice except more of the tedium she already experiences watching other people have more interesting lives?" "You could offer yourself," Lady Helena said gently. "Your genuine regard, your respect for her intelligence, your evident admiration. These things matter more than superficial charm, Jasper." "Apparently not," Jasper replied, watching as Felix laughed at something Beatrice's mother said. "She is smiling at him. She never smiles in ballrooms. Felix achieved in one evening what I could not accomplish in 2 years of silent observation." "Perhaps that tells us everything we need to know about which of us deserves her attention." Lady Helena sighed. "Or perhaps it tells us that you are a coward who needs a rather severe intervention before you lose something you have not yet had the courage to pursue." But Jasper had already turned away, striding toward the exit with the rigid posture of someone fleeing before the damage became irreparable. The following afternoon, Felix arrived at Sutton Manor precisely at 3 o'clock, the fashionable hour for social calls. He brought with him a leather-bound volume on recent botanical discoveries in the Americas, which he presented to Beatrice with genuine enthusiasm. "I thought you might find this interesting," he said, as they settled in the drawing room under the watchful eye of Beatrice's mother. "It includes detailed illustrations of plant species that have never been formally classified. The author's observations are fascinating." Beatrice accepted the volume with careful reverence, opening it to reveal beautifully rendered drawings of exotic flora. "This is extraordinary," she breathed. I have never seen anything quite like some of these specimens. Look at the structure of this flowering vine. It seems to contradict several established principles of plant morphology. They fell into animated discussion, Felix asking questions that revealed genuine curiosity, while Beatrice offered analysis that demonstrated years of self-directed study. Lady Margaret sat nearby with her embroidery, occasionally glancing up with an expression that suggested she still could not quite believe this was happening. When Felix finally departed after the appropriate 20 minutes, he paused at the door. "Miss Sutton, there is a lecture at the Royal Society next week on advances in agricultural science. It is not typically considered appropriate entertainment for ladies, but I thought you might find it interesting. Would you and your mother perhaps consider attending as my guests?" Beatrice felt a sudden heat steal the air from her lungs. "I would like nothing better," she said honestly. Over the following weeks, Felix's courtship became the talk of London society. He appeared at Sutton Manor with reliable frequency, always bearing thoughtful gifts, books on topics he knew interested Beatrice, rare plant specimens for her small conservatory, tickets to lectures and exhibitions that most gentlemen would never consider appropriate courtship venues. They walked in Hyde Park during the fashionable promenade hour, though their conversations centered on engineering developments and scientific discoveries rather than gossip and flirtation. They attended musicales together, sitting in the back where they could whisper about the technical skill of the performers without disturbing others. They went to the theater, not to see romantic comedies, but to watch new productions of Shakespeare that they could debate afterward. For the first time in her 24 years, Beatrice felt seen. Every day brought new evidence that someone found her interesting and valued her opinions. She began to smile more readily and speak with greater confidence. The transformation did not go unnoticed. Whispers followed them everywhere. Speculation about whether Felix Bainbridge had finally found the woman who could capture his heart. Matrons who had previously dismissed Beatrice now studied her with new interest. What none of them noticed, except perhaps Lady Helena Marchwood, was the other man who appeared with increasing frequency wherever Felix and Beatrice happened to be. Jasper Bainbridge, who was known to detest music halls, attended 4 in as many weeks. Jasper, who avoided social gatherings whenever possible, suddenly accepted every invitation that might overlap with his brother's courtship activities. Jasper, who usually spent his evenings reviewing estate reports, could now be found at theaters, lectures, and even the occasional garden party. And Jasper watched. He did not approach Beatrice, did not interrupt her conversations with Felix, did not insert himself into their developing relationship. But his gray eyes followed her with a storm-darkened focus. He stood at the edges of rooms, always within line of sight, his expression carefully neutral, except for brief moments when something fierce and hungry flickered across his features. Beatrice did notice eventually. It was impossible not to, when the same imposing figure appeared consistently in her peripheral vision. At first she thought it mere coincidence. London society was small enough that repeated encounters were inevitable. But after the 3rd musical event that Jasper attended, despite Felix mentioning his brother's loathing for such entertainments, she began to wonder, "Does your brother disapprove of our friendship?" she asked Felix one afternoon as they walked through Hyde Park, trailing her mother and sister by several discreet paces. Felix glanced back to where Jasper rode his horse along Rotten Row, maintaining a distance that might have seemed casual if not for the frequency of these parallel appearances. Disapprove? Felix's expression turned thoughtful. "No, I do not believe disapproval accurately describes Jasper's sentiments regarding our courtship." "Then what would you call it?" Beatrice pressed. "He looks at me sometimes with such intensity. I cannot determine if he thinks I am unsuitable for your attentions or if perhaps he believes I am deceiving you somehow." Felix stopped walking, turning to face Beatrice directly. For once, his usual cheerful demeanor gave way to something more serious. "Miss Beatrice," he said carefully, "has it occurred to you that my brother might be watching because he wishes it were him walking with you instead of me?" The suggestion was so unexpected that Beatrice actually laughed. Your brother the Earl? The man who has spoken perhaps 10 words directly to me in 6 years of attending the same social events? I think not, Mr. Bainbridge. Jasper is not skilled at expressing sentiment, Felix said. He is brilliant with numbers, exceptional at estate management, capable of debating parliamentary procedure until his opponents weep. But emotions make him uncomfortable, and he tends to retreat into silence rather than risk saying something inadequate. That seems a rather convenient excuse for complete disinterest, Beatrice replied, though something in her chest tightened at the thought that she might have missed something significant. Felix opened his mouth as if to argue further, then seemed to reconsider. Perhaps you are right, he said lightly, though his eyes held a strange, knowing gleam. Perhaps I am reading too much into my brother's peculiar behavior. Shall we continue our walk? But the seed of doubt had been planted, and over the following days, Beatrice found herself increasingly aware of Jasper's presence. She noticed how he straightened imperceptibly when she entered a room, how his gaze followed her movements with a focus that suggested he was memorizing every detail, how his expression softened for just an instant when she laughed at something Felix said before hardening again. And she noticed something else, something that made her breath catch unexpectedly. The way Jasper looked at her was nothing like how other men regarded beautiful women. It was the look of someone lost finding direction, of someone who had been searching and had finally, devastatingly, found what they sought. It was the way she imagined someone might look at her if they truly saw her, all of her, and found her valuable beyond measure. The realization troubled Beatrice in ways she could not articulate. Felix was wonderful, charming, and attentive. Their friendship had blossomed into something comfortable and warm. She enjoyed his company immensely. But when Jasper looked at her with that wounded, hungry expression, something in her responded that had nothing to do with comfort or friendship. 6 weeks into Felix's courtship, Viscount Sutton invited the Bainbridge brothers to dinner to discuss the possibility of formalizing Felix's intentions toward Beatrice. It was, everyone acknowledged, a mere formality. Felix had been courting her openly for weeks. The match was expected, approved, and anticipated. The dinner began pleasantly enough. Lady Margaret had outdone herself with the menu, clearly determined to impress. Lydia was on her best behavior, genuinely pleased that her sister might finally achieve matrimonial success. Felix was his usual charming self, keeping conversation flowing with easy grace. Jasper sat at the opposite end of the table, ate little, and said even less. Beatrice found herself acutely aware of his presence, of the way his fingers gripped his wineglass with excessive force, of how his jaw tightened whenever Felix made her laugh. After the meal, as was customary, the men retreated to Viscount Sutton's study while the ladies retired to the drawing room. Beatrice sat with her needlework, though her mind was elsewhere, imagining the conversation happening behind closed doors. She expected Felix to request permission for a formal courtship leading to engagement. She expected her father to agree enthusiastically. She expected to become betrothed within the week. What she did not expect was the sound of raised voices filtering through the study door, or the way her mother's head snapped up in alarm, or the sudden silence that followed before footsteps sounded in the hallway. The study door opened with more force than necessary. Felix emerged first, his expression bewildered. Behind him came Jasper, and Beatrice's breath caught at the raw emotion visible on his normally controlled features. Her father followed, looking utterly confused. "I apologize, Lord Sutton," Jasper said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "But I cannot remain silent any longer." "Jasper," Felix began, but his brother cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No, Felix. You have forced this situation, and now I must see it through." Jasper turned to face the room, his gray eyes finding Beatrice with an intensity that made her heart hammer. "Miss Beatrice, I must speak plainly. Consequences be damned." "My lord," Beatrice managed, setting aside her needlework with trembling hands. Jasper crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping at a distance that was proper, yet felt intimate enough to make her skin prickle with awareness. "You are courting the wrong brother," he said bluntly. The words fell into the drawing room like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock outward. Lady Margaret made a small, choking sound. Lydia's mouth fell open in an expression of comical surprise. Viscount Sutton sputtered something incoherent. "I beg your pardon?" Beatrice whispered. "Felix does not love you," Jasper continued, his voice gaining strength despite the obvious cost of each word. "He is fond of you, certainly. Intrigued by you, absolutely. He genuinely enjoys your company and finds your intelligence refreshing after years of vapid debutantes. But he is not in love with you, Miss Beatrice, and you deserve someone who is." Felix had followed his brother into the drawing room, and to Beatrice's utter confusion, he was smiling. Not the polite social smile she had seen him wear 1,000 times, but genuine amusement mixed with relief. "Finally," Felix said softly. "I thought you might never find the courage." "What is happening?" Beatrice demanded, looking between the two brothers. "Felix, is what he says true? You do not have feelings for me?" Felix moved to stand beside her, taking her hand in a gesture that felt brotherly rather than romantic for the first time since their courtship began. "Miss Beatrice, I need to confess something rather terrible," he said. "6 weeks ago, my brother came to me in a state of absolute misery. He said he had been watching you for 2 years, that he believed you to be the most extraordinary woman he had ever encountered, and that he could not bear to watch you be overlooked for one more season. He begged me to court you, to give you the attention and admiration you deserved, because he was terrified that if he attempted it himself, his lack of charm would drive you away." Beatrice stared at Felix, then at Jasper, whose face had gone pale. "You what?" "I refused initially," Felix continued. "It seemed madness. But then Jasper said something that changed my mind. He said that even if his courtship failed, you deserved to know that someone saw you as more than furniture or a convenient aunt to your sister's future children. He wanted you to experience being chosen, being valued, being celebrated." "So you agreed to court me?" Beatrice said slowly. "On your brother's behalf?" "Not exactly," Felix corrected. "I agreed to demonstrate that you were worthy of courtship, that men of sense would find you fascinating and delightful. I thought perhaps, if society saw you differently, if you saw yourself differently, Jasper might find the courage to act on his own sentiments." "But you failed to account for your own charm," Jasper said bitterly. "You made her bloom, made her confident, made her happy. And I stood by watching it happen, knowing that I could never achieve what you did so effortlessly." Beatrice rose from her seat, her needlework sliding unnoticed to the floor. 6 years of practiced emotional control abandoned her as fury and confusion warred for dominance. "You manipulated me," she said, her voice shaking. "Both of you. You made me believe that someone genuinely wanted my company, valued my thoughts, chose me over all others. And it was a performance, a scheme to make me acceptable for a man too cowardly to approach me himself." "It was not like that," Felix protested, but Beatrice rounded on him with unexpected ferocity. "Then what was it like, Mr. Bainbridge? What would you call 6 weeks of false courtship designed to make me suitable for another man? What is that if not manipulation?" "It was desperation," Jasper said quietly. "And I am not proud of it." Beatrice turned to face him fully for the first time since the confrontation began. He stood straight and rigid, his gray eyes filled with a misery so profound it was almost tangible. "You have been watching me for 2 years," she said, and it was not a question. "Yes." "And you never spoke to me because you believed yourself too dull, too serious, too inadequate." "Yes." "So instead of risking rejection yourself, you sent your charming brother to do what you could not." Jasper flinched as though struck. "When you phrase it that way, it sounds unforgivable. Perhaps it is. I make no excuses, Miss Beatrice. I am a coward who chose the safest path, who risked nothing while asking my brother to risk everything." "Why now?" Beatrice demanded. Why confess this tonight of all nights, when Felix was about to request formal permission to court me properly? Why not allow the charade to continue? Because I could not, Jasper said simply. I could not watch you accept his courtship, watch you become his wife, spend the rest of my life knowing that I might have had a chance, if only I had possessed the courage to try. And Felix said something tonight in that study that made me realize I had to speak, even if it meant losing you forever. What did he say? Jasper's gray eyes held hers with desperate honesty. He asked me how I would feel attending your wedding, dancing at your engagement ball, watching you bear his children. And I realized that I would rather face your contempt, your anger, your absolute rejection than spend a lifetime pretending not to love you while watching you belong to someone else. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Lady Margaret had gone very pale. Viscount Sutton looked utterly lost. Lydia watched the scene unfold with rapt attention. Beatrice felt as though she were standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying, a precipice that would change everything depending on which direction she stepped. "Tell me what you see when you look at me," she said softly. Jasper drew a shaky breath. "I see the woman who made an observation about agricultural policy at Lady Ashford's dinner 2 years ago that was more insightful than anything said in Parliament that entire season. And no one heard her because they were too busy admiring her sister's new gown. I see someone who finds beauty in common ferns, who understands complex economic theory, who possesses both brilliant intelligence and genuine kindness." His voice grew stronger, words flowing now as though a dam had broken. "I see a woman who is made invisible by a society too superficial to recognize value when it stands in front of them. I see strength in your dignity, grace in your silence, power in your patience. I see everything I never knew I was searching for until that dinner 2 years ago when you spoke, and I felt my entire world shift on its axis." He took a half step closer, still maintaining propriety, but closing the distance between them with palpable intensity. "I see the person I want to wake beside every morning for the rest of my life. I see the mind I want to debate with, the voice I want to hear analyze investment reports and political developments and whatever else crosses your fascinating thoughts. I see my future, Miss Beatrice, and I know I have no right to ask, no claim to make after manipulating you so abominably, but I am asking anyway." Jasper bowed deeply, his position one of supplication rather than mere formality. "Beatrice Flora Sutton, I am not charming like my brother. I cannot make you laugh effortlessly or turn courtship into adventure. I am serious, driven, often boring. I work too much and socialize too little. I will likely discuss estate management at breakfast and debate parliamentary procedure at dinner. I have no poetry in my soul and no music in my heart." His voice cracked slightly. "But I can promise this. I will see you every day for the rest of our lives. I will value your intelligence and seek your counsel. I will fight anyone who dares to make you feel invisible ever again. I will love you with an intensity that terrifies me, and I will never, ever let a day pass without making certain you know that you are extraordinary." He pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket, opening it to reveal a ring that made Lady Margaret gasp. It was not the typical engagement ring, no large diamond meant to display wealth. Instead, it held a deep green emerald surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light, creating an effect like sunlight filtering through leaves. "This was my grandmother's ring," Jasper said softly. "She was a botanist before such pursuits were considered acceptable for women. She studied plant specimens and catalogued species, and was generally regarded as eccentric by polite society. My grandfather loved her more than life itself. When he proposed, he chose an emerald because he said it reminded him of the greenhouses where she spent her happiest hours. I can think of no one more worthy to wear it." Tears were streaming down Beatrice's face now, though she could not have said when they began. 6 years of believing herself unworthy of notice, 6 weeks of blooming under what she thought was genuine admiration, and now this revelation that someone had been watching her, valuing her, loving her in silence for 2 entire years. "You should have spoken to me," she said, her voice breaking. 2 years ago, you should have approached me directly instead of watching from shadows like some gothic novel specter. "I know," Jasper said miserably. "I know, and I have no defense except my own cowardice. You should have trusted me to see past your seriousness to the man beneath. You should have given me the choice, the agency to decide for myself. I know. And you absolutely should not have manipulated me through your brother, no matter how well-intentioned the scheme. I know, Miss Beatrice. I know all of it, and I am more sorry than I can possibly express." Beatrice looked down at the man before her. This Earl, who commanded respect and wielded power in parliamentary chambers, now utterly vulnerable and begging for her acceptance. She thought about Felix's careful courtship, how wonderful it had felt to be noticed and chosen. She thought about the past 6 years of invisibility, the pain of believing herself fundamentally unworthy of love. And she thought about those moments over the past weeks when she'd caught Jasper watching her with that fierce, hungry expression. How something in her had responded despite her contentment with Felix's attention. "You want to discuss estate management at breakfast?" she asked finally. Jasper blinked, clearly confused by the question. Yes. And you will seek my counsel on investment decisions?" "Always. And you promise that you will never allow anyone to make me feel invisible again?" "On my life." Beatrice looked at Felix, who stood watching the scene with an expression of desperate hope. "And you, Mr. Bainbridge? What do you gain from this elaborate scheme?" Felix's smile was gentle. "I gain a dear friend, if you will permit it. I genuinely enjoy your company, Miss Beatrice. You are fascinating and delightful, and I hope that even if you choose to reject my brother, you might allow me to continue our friendship. Though I confess I will be rather put out if you refuse him, because then I shall have to watch him mope about being tragically noble and self-sacrificing, which becomes tedious after the first few months." Despite everything, Beatrice found herself laughing through her tears. "You are incorrigible. I prefer to think of myself as enthusiastically helpful," Felix replied, "though I admit my methods were questionable." Beatrice turned back to Jasper, who still stood before her with desperate hope warring with resignation in his gray eyes. She thought about the past 6 years, about all the balls where she had made herself invisible, all the conversations where her words went unheard, and she thought about this man who had heard her speak once, 2 years ago, and had been watching ever since, who had seen value where others saw wallflowers, who loved her enough to orchestrate an elaborate courtship by proxy because he believed she deserved to know she was worthy, even if he never claimed her for himself. It was manipulative and presumptuous and absolutely infuriating. It was also the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her. "The Earl of Lyndhurst brought me ferns," she said softly. Jasper's brow furrowed in confusion. "I beg your pardon?" "Last week, when you attended that dreadfully boring musical that Felix mentioned you detest. I saw a package left at our door the next morning. No card, no explanation. Just a collection of rare fern specimens, including 2 varieties I had only read about in botanical journals, but never seen in person. I thought perhaps Felix had sent them, but he seemed genuinely confused when I thanked him." Understanding dawned in Jasper's expression, followed by embarrassment. "I may have mentioned to the head gardener at my estate that certain specimens might be appreciated. I did not include a card because I thought it presumptuous to claim credit for what might be considered inadequate." "They were perfect," Beatrice said. "They were the kind of gift that could only come from someone who truly understood my interests, who listened when I spoke, who paid attention to details that most people would overlook." She reached out, placing her hand over his where it still held the ring box. "You frustrate me enormously, Jasper Bainbridge. Your methods were questionable, your courage lacking, and your assumption that I needed your brother's intervention rather insulting to my ability to appreciate genuine regard over superficial charm." Jasper's face fell. I understand. I do not deserve forgiveness for what I have done. I am not finished, Beatrice interrupted. You frustrate me, and you have handled this entire situation abominably. But you also saw me when no one else did. You valued me when society dismissed me. You loved me quietly and desperately for 2 years while I remained completely oblivious. And despite being a coward about approaching me directly, you were brave enough to stand here tonight and risk everything rather than watch me make a commitment to your brother. She took a shaky breath. So yes, Lord Lyndhurst, I will marry you. I will discuss estate management at breakfast and debate parliamentary procedure at dinner. I will help you manage your properties and offer counsel on investments. I will argue with you about your methods and make you promise to never manipulate me again. And I will try very hard to forgive you for the past 6 weeks of confusion and emotional turmoil, because despite everything, I find that I would rather be with a man who sees me than a man who merely entertains me. The room erupted into chaos. Lady Margaret burst into tears of joy. Viscount Sutton bellowed congratulations while looking thoroughly confused about how exactly this had happened. Lydia squealed with delight, immediately planning what she would wear to her sister's wedding. But Beatrice was aware only of Jasper, who stared up at her with an expression of such overwhelming relief and joy that it transformed his entire face. He stepped forward, taking her hand with a gentleness that belied his obvious emotion. I will spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice, he said hoarsely. Every single day, Beatrice, I swear it. I know, she replied softly. Now put that ring on my finger before your brother makes some inappropriate comment about how long this is taking. I was merely going to observe that perhaps now Jasper will stop appearing at every social event looking like someone attending his own execution, Felix offered cheerfully. Though I suppose I should prepare myself for him becoming insufferable in the opposite direction. Nothing is worse than a previously miserable man who has suddenly achieved happiness. They tend to grin at inappropriate moments and wax poetic about true love. Jasper ignored his brother entirely, sliding the emerald ring onto Beatrice's finger with such reverent care that she felt fresh tears threaten. It fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. 2 years, she whispered as Jasper raised her hand to his lips, placing a kiss on her knuckles that sent heat racing through her veins. You could have saved us both so much time. I know, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. But perhaps the waiting makes this moment sweeter. I have imagined this 1,000 times, and reality exceeds every fantasy. That is dangerously close to poetic, Beatrice teased. You claim to have no poetry in your soul. You bring it out in me, Jasper said simply, among many other previously dormant qualities. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and planning. Viscount Sutton, having recovered from his shock, immediately began calculating the advantageous nature of the match. Lady Margaret wept while simultaneously cataloguing everything that would need to be arranged for a wedding. Lydia hugged Beatrice fiercely, whispering that she had always known her sister would find someone special, though perhaps not quite in this dramatic fashion. Felix remained for an hour, fielding questions about the courtship with practiced charm, while carefully omitting the more questionable details of the scheme he and Jasper had orchestrated. When he finally prepared to depart, he pulled Beatrice aside for a private word. I meant what I said earlier, he told her seriously. I do hope we might remain friends, Miss Beatrice. I have genuinely enjoyed our time together, even if my intentions were not entirely what you believed. I was a willing co-conspirator, but I enjoyed seeing your brilliance more than I can say. Of course we shall remain friends, Beatrice replied, though I reserve the right to feel occasionally irritated with you for the next few months while I settle my mind after the full extent of your deception. Fair enough, Felix agreed with a grin. Though I should warn you that Jasper is likely to be pathetically grateful for quite some time. He has been utterly miserable for weeks watching me court you. It was starting to affect his work, which is saying something because the man normally treats estate business like a sacred calling. He loves me that much? Beatrice asked softly. Felix's expression turned gentle. My brother has never done anything by halves, Miss Beatrice. When he commits to something, he commits completely. You will find him perhaps overwhelming at times, certainly intense, but never insincere. He means every word he said tonight. After Felix departed, Jasper requested a few moments alone with Beatrice, properly chaperoned by her mother from across the drawing room. They sat together on the settee, Jasper maintaining the required distance while his gaze devoured her face as though memorizing every detail. I want to explain something, he said quietly, about why I watched for so long without speaking. It was not only cowardice, though that certainly played a role. Then what was it? Beatrice asked. You were happy as you were, Jasper said. Or rather, you had made peace with your lot. You had built a life where you found satisfaction in books and learning, and the prospect of being an aunt to your sister's children. You seemed content with that future, and I feared that my clumsy attempts at courtship would only disrupt that peace without offering anything better in return. He reached out, then hesitated, and Beatrice took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I am not Felix, Jasper continued. I cannot make courtship entertaining or romance exciting. I would have asked to discuss agricultural reports and invited you to review investment portfolios. I would have been serious and dull and exactly the kind of suitor who would make other women flee in terror. So I convinced myself that you were better off without my interference, that watching from a distance was enough. But it was not enough, Beatrice said softly. No, Jasper agreed. It was torture. Every ball where I watched you fade into corners, every social event where people spoke over you or around you, every moment where you made yourself small because society had taught you that your value was negligible. It destroyed me, Beatrice. And finally, I could not bear it any longer. So I went to Felix and begged him to show you what I could not, to give you the experience of being chosen even if it meant you might ultimately choose him instead of me. Beatrice studied their joined hands, thinking about everything that had transpired. You gave me a gift, she said finally. These past weeks with Felix taught me that I could be interesting to someone, that my intelligence and opinions had value. He helped me see myself differently. But you, Jasper, you saw me first. Before anyone else, before I saw myself, you looked at the woman hiding in corners and recognized something worth loving. You were never a wallflower, Jasper said fiercely. You were a rare orchid in a garden full of common roses, and everyone was too foolish to recognize the difference. Now that is definitely poetry, Beatrice said with a smile. You have corrupted me already, Jasper replied, but his gray eyes held warmth that transformed his entire face. They sat together in comfortable silence for several minutes, simply existing in each other's presence now that the truth had been revealed. Lady Margaret dozed in her chair across the room, exhausted by the evening's emotional upheaval. What happens now? Beatrice finally asked. Now I court you properly, Jasper said, with full transparency and no manipulation. I will call on you tomorrow afternoon if you permit it. We will go for walks and attend social events together. I will send you books and prints to share your interests. And I will do my absolute best to prove that I am worthy of the extraordinary gift you have given me by accepting my proposal. I have one condition, Beatrice said. Jasper tensed slightly. Name it. You must promise to never make decisions about my life without consulting me first. No more schemes orchestrated for my benefit without my knowledge. No more watching in silence while assuming you know what is best for me. If we are to be married, we are partners. That means honesty and communication, even when it is difficult. I swear it, Jasper said immediately. On everything I hold sacred, Beatrice, I will never keep secrets from you again or presume to manage your life without your full participation. Good, Beatrice said. Then I suppose we should discuss wedding arrangements. I imagine your estate requires a mistress who can help manage properties and investments. I should like to learn everything about your holdings so that I might be genuinely useful rather than merely decorative. The expression on Jasper's face suggested she had just offered him the world. "You want to work alongside me?" "Of course," Beatrice replied. "What did you think I would do? Sit in drawing rooms and embroider while you handled everything of importance? I have spent 6 years being ornamental, Jasper. I should very much like to be functional instead." "I love you," Jasper said suddenly, the words bursting out as though he could no longer contain them. "I know I said it earlier, but I need you to understand. I love you so completely that it frightens me. I love your intelligence and your strength and your dignity. I love the way you study ferns and debate economic policy and refuse to accept that you are anything less than extraordinary. I will love you until I die, Beatrice. That is my promise." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes again. "I am not certain I love you yet," she said honestly. "I am drawn to you in ways I do not fully understand. I feel a weight of unblinking attention when you look at me that I never felt with Felix. But I need time to settle my mind after the turmoil of this evening's revelations." "That is more than fair," Jasper said, though she could see the flicker of vulnerability in his expression. "I have had 2 years to develop my feelings, while you have had mere hours to process everything. Take all the time you need, Beatrice. I will wait." "Thank you," she whispered. When Jasper finally departed near midnight, Beatrice retired to her room feeling exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. She sat at her window, staring out at the dark London streets, while her mind replayed the evening's extraordinary events. 6 years of invisibility, 6 weeks of false courtship, and now a future with a man who had loved her in silence while she remained oblivious. It was overwhelming, and yet, as Beatrice finally prepared for bed, she found herself smiling. The emerald ring on her finger caught the candlelight, green fire that reminded her of summer leaves and greenhouse glass, and a future where she might finally be more than decorative furniture. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Society's reaction to her engagement with an Earl would be intense. There would be gossip and speculation and likely resentment from women who had pursued Jasper themselves. But tonight, Beatrice allowed herself to simply feel chosen. Not by the charming brother who had made her bloom through carefully orchestrated courtship, but by the serious, intense man who had seen her value 2 years ago and had waited patiently for the right moment to claim what his heart had already declared his. It was, she decided, an acceptable beginning to the next chapter of her life. The following weeks proved even more complicated than Beatrice had anticipated. News of her engagement to the Earl of Lyndhurst spread through London society with the speed of wildfire, and the reactions ranged from shock to outrage to frank disbelief. The most common whispered speculation suggested that Jasper had been compromised somehow into the match, that perhaps Beatrice or her family had manipulated him during the courtship with Felix. Some claimed that the Earl was making a charitable gesture, offering marriage to save the Wallflower from complete social failure. Others insisted that he must be suffering from some illness that affected his judgment, because what else could explain choosing Beatrice Sutton over any of the eligible beauties who had pursued him for years? Lady Constantia Worthington was particularly vocal in her criticism. At a morning call 3 days after the engagement was announced, she cornered Lady Margaret with false concern dripping from every word. "My dear Mrs. Sutton, I do hope the Earl knows what he is doing. Such a hasty engagement after courting the younger brother. One worries about the appearance of things." "The appearance," Lady Margaret replied with unusual steel in her voice, "is that my daughter has secured a match with one of the most respected men in England. I fail to see what concern it is of yours, Lady Constantia." "Oh, no concern at all," Lady Constantia said quickly. "Merely surprise. After 6 seasons of watching dear Beatrice sit decoratively in corners, one naturally wonders what changed, though I suppose even wallflowers occasionally bloom, however unexpectedly." The comment reached Beatrice's ears through Lydia, who recounted it with outrage. Beatrice felt the familiar sting of dismissal, the suggestion that her worth was questionable even now when someone of significance had chosen her. Jasper's reaction to the gossip was considerably less measured. He appeared at the next major social event, a ball hosted by the Duchess of Radcliffe, with Beatrice on his arm and an expression of barely contained fury. When Lady Constantia approached to offer insincere congratulations, Jasper cut her off with devastating precision. "Lady Constantia, I believe you have been spreading speculation about my engagement to Miss Sutton. Allow me to clarify the situation so that you might correct any misunderstandings in your future conversations." He positioned himself slightly in front of Beatrice, a protective gesture that was both subtle and unmistakable. "I have admired Miss Beatrice Sutton for more than 2 years," Jasper continued, his voice carrying to nearby guests with intentional projection. "I watched her demonstrate intelligence, grace, and dignity while people like yourself dismissed her. I recognized her value when others were too blind or too foolish to see past superficial attributes to genuine worth." Lady Constantia had gone quite pale. "My lord, I meant no offense." "And yet offense was given," Jasper replied coldly. "Let me be absolutely clear. Anyone who questions my choice of bride, who suggests manipulation or charity or compromised judgment, will find themselves no longer welcome in my home or at events I host. I do not tolerate insults to my future wife, subtle or otherwise. Am I understood?" "Perfectly, my lord," Lady Constantia managed, before fleeing with whatever dignity she could salvage. The incident was recounted throughout London within hours. The Earl of Lyndhurst, known for his measured temperament and political acumen, had publicly defended his fiancée with a ferocity that shocked observers. Society began to recalibrate its assessment of the engagement. "That was rather dramatic," Beatrice told Jasper later that evening as they took a turn about the ballroom. "She called you a wallflower," Jasper said flatly, "as though being overlooked by fools somehow diminished your value. I will not permit it, Beatrice. Not now, not ever." "I have been called worse things over the past 6 years," Beatrice replied. "You cannot fight every battle on my behalf." "Watch me," Jasper said, with such absolute conviction that Beatrice found herself believing him. As they waltzed, Beatrice became aware of the scrutiny following their every movement, and Jasper seemed utterly unconcerned with all of it. He looked at Beatrice as though she were the only person in the room, his eyes holding that same fierce intensity she had noticed weeks ago but now understood. He was not bothering to hide his feelings anymore, and the raw emotion visible in his expression made her breath catch. "You are staring," she murmured. "I have stared at you for 2 years," Jasper replied. "The only difference now is that I no longer have to pretend I am looking at something else. People will talk. Let them. I spent too long caring what society thought. It nearly cost me everything." Over the following weeks, Jasper courted Beatrice with an intensity that left no doubt about his feelings. He called on her daily, often bringing documents related to his various business interests and asking her opinion on decisions he faced. They spent hours in her father's study discussing estate management, investment strategies, and political developments. To Beatrice's surprise, she found these conversations as engaging as the more entertaining courtship Felix had conducted. Jasper never tried to make estate business amusing. He simply assumed she would be interested and capable of understanding complex issues, and his assumption became self-fulfilling. "The tenants in the northern holdings are requesting permission to try a new crop rotation system," Jasper told her one afternoon, spreading detailed reports across the desk. "The proposed practice shows promise, but requires significant initial investment. I need to decide whether the potential long-term benefits outweigh the immediate costs." Beatrice studied the documents carefully, noting the calculations and projections. "The mathematics supports the investment," she said finally, "but you should visit the tenants yourself to assess their competence. New methods fail without skilled execution, regardless of theoretical merit." Jasper looked at her with an expression that made her skin warm. You see the human element I missed. The numbers convinced me. But you are correct that execution matters more than theory. We could visit together, Beatrice suggested. I should like to see your properties and meet the people who depend on them. After we are married, Jasper said, I will take you to every estate I own. You will learn the operations and the people, and together we will make decisions about management and improvements. You will be my partner in all of it, Beatrice. Not merely a wife who occupies the manor house, but a true colleague. The promise sent a thrill through her that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with purpose. For the first time in her life, Beatrice envisioned a future where her intelligence would be utilized rather than tolerated. I think I might be falling in love with you, she said softly. Jasper froze, his eyes searching her face with desperate hope. Truly? Truly, Beatrice confirmed. Not because you are charming or entertaining, but because you make me feel valuable. You treat my mind as an asset rather than an aberration. You want me as a partner, not an ornament. And when you look at me, I see reflected in your eyes the person I always hoped I might be. You have always been that person, Jasper said hoarsely. I merely recognized it. He reached across the desk, taking her hand with a gentleness that contradicted his obvious emotion. I will spend our marriage proving that your value is infinite. Every day, Beatrice, I swear it. Their wedding took place 6 weeks after the engagement, a timeline that caused additional scandal, but which neither Beatrice nor Jasper cared to extend. The ceremony was held at St. George's in Hanover Square, attended by family and close friends, rather than the massive society event that some expected. Felix served as best man, offering a speech during the wedding breakfast that managed to be both hilarious and touching. He recounted carefully edited versions of the courtship, emphasizing Jasper's devotion while conveniently omitting the more questionable aspects of their scheme. He concluded by noting that he had never seen his brother happier, and that Beatrice had performed a miracle in making the Earl smile with genuine joy rather than mere politeness. Lydia served as Beatrice's only attendant, radiant in rose silk and genuinely thrilled for her sister's happiness. The sisters would both marry well, though Beatrice's match was acknowledged as superior in rank and possibly in affection. The most notable absence from the guest list was Lady Constantia Worthington, who had requested an invitation with increasing desperation as the wedding approached. Jasper had refused with a terseness that left no room for negotiation. Anyone who questioned your worth does not deserve to witness your triumph, he told Beatrice when she inquired about the decision. Let her live with the knowledge that her cruelty cost her access to one of the better connections in London. After the wedding, Jasper took Beatrice to Lyndhurst Hall in Hertfordshire, the primary seat of his earldom. The estate was magnificent, sprawling across hundreds of acres with formal gardens, productive farmland, and a manor house that dated back 2 centuries. But what captured Beatrice's attention was not the grandeur. It was the suite of offices on the ground floor where Jasper conducted his business. Large desks stood side by side, positioned to allow conversation while working. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books on agriculture, economics, and estate management. This is where I spend most of my time, Jasper said, watching her explore the space. I had a second desk brought in last week. I thought perhaps you might work alongside me, if that appeals to you. Beatrice ran her hand along the polished wood of her designated desk, fighting back tears. You prepared a place for me. Of course, Jasper replied, as though it were obvious. You are not a guest in my life, Beatrice. You are my partner. This is our office now, our estate, our future to build together. Over the following weeks, Beatrice immersed herself in learning the complexities of managing Lyndhurst Holdings. Jasper proved to be an excellent teacher, patient with her questions and respectful of her insights. They developed a working rhythm where his mathematical precision complemented her prudent thinking, each strengthening the other's weaknesses. The tenants and staff initially regarded Beatrice with uncertainty. Ladies of rank typically concerned themselves with social matters, not estate business. But Beatrice proved herself through consistent engagement and practical suggestions, earning respect through competence. 3 months after their marriage, a situation arose that tested Beatrice's newfound partnership with Jasper. A wealthy merchant approached them with a proposal to purchase a section of Lyndhurst land for commercial development. The offer was substantial, enough to fund improvements across all their properties. Jasper was inclined to accept. The mathematics supported the decision, and the land in question was relatively unproductive for agricultural purposes. He also held a subtle, aristocratic disdain for selling ancestral land to trade, yet the profit was hard to ignore. But Beatrice disagreed. "The land may be poor for crops," she argued, studying the maps in their office. "But it borders the village. Selling it for commercial development will disrupt the entire neighborhood. The merchant plans to build warehouses and processing facilities. The noise, the traffic, the change to the landscape will affect everyone who lives nearby." "The profit would benefit those same people," Jasper countered. "We could lower rents, invest in improvements to tenant cottages, fund the school. Or we could preserve the well-being of the tenantry and find other ways to generate income," Beatrice replied. "This decision prioritizes short-term financial gain over the long-term harmony of the parish. The numbers may support selling, but the human cost argues against it." They debated for hours, neither willing to concede. Finally, Jasper set down his pen and looked at Beatrice with an expression of admiration. "What do you propose instead?" he asked. "Let me visit the village," Beatrice said. "Let me speak with the tenants and understand what they want. Then we make the decision together, based on complete information rather than abstract calculations." Jasper hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. But I accompany you. We conduct this inquiry together." The visit to the village revealed that Beatrice's instincts were correct. The tenants were horrified by the prospect of commercial development, fearing it would destroy the parish they had built over generations. They offered alternative suggestions, including cooperative farming initiatives that might improve productivity of the disputed land without requiring sale. Jasper listened carefully to their concerns and proposals. On the carriage ride back to Lyndhurst Hall, he was uncharacteristically quiet. "I was wrong," he finally said. "I looked only at numbers and missed the broader implications. You were correct to insist we consider the welfare of the people." "We were both partially correct," Beatrice replied. "Your analysis of the financial opportunity was sound, but partnerships work best when different perspectives are both valued and integrated. This is why we make decisions together, Jasper. Neither of us sees the complete picture alone." He took her hand, raising it to his lips. "This is why I love you. You make me better, Beatrice, more complete, more thoughtful, more human." "And you make me feel valuable," she replied. "For 6 years I believed my intelligence was a burden rather than an asset. You changed that." They declined the merchant's offer and instead implemented the tenants' cooperative farming proposal. Within 2 years, the disputed land became one of their most productive holdings, generating income that exceeded what the sale would have provided while preserving the neighborhood. The story spread through landowning circles, noted as an example of progressive estate management that prioritized both profit and people. Requests for Jasper's advice on agricultural matters increasingly included invitations for Beatrice to participate, her reputation as a prudent strategist growing alongside her husband's. 3 years after their marriage, Lyndhurst Hall hosted its first major social event, an annual ball that Jasper had previously avoided hosting. Beatrice insisted they begin the tradition, arguing that their position came with social responsibilities they could not ignore indefinitely. The guest list was carefully curated. Friends and family received invitations. But anyone who had dismissed Beatrice during her 6 seasons as a wallflower found their names conspicuously absent. Lady Constantia Worthington sent multiple letters begging for an invitation. Each was politely declined with the same response that Beatrice had crafted personally. "We regret that our guest list is quite full, perhaps at a future event." The ball itself was spectacular. The ballroom glowed with candlelight. The refreshments were exquisite, and the guest list represented the most influential people in English society. Beatrice stood beside Jasper in the receiving line, greeting guests with confidence. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that matched her engagement ring, and her dark hair was arranged in an elegant style that emphasized her intelligence rather than attempting to compete with conventional beauty. When Felix arrived with his current companion, a widowed duchess, he pulled Beatrice aside for a private word. "You are magnificent," he said warmly. "Jasper is insufferable in his happiness, exactly as I predicted. It is quite tedious, really." "You are still unmarried yourself," Beatrice observed. "I am perfectly content," Felix replied. "I have freedom, friendship, and the satisfaction of knowing I helped orchestrate the most successful match in recent memory. What more could I want?" "Someone to share your life with," Beatrice suggested gently. Felix's expression turned thoughtful. "Perhaps someday, but I am in no hurry. Besides, watching you and Jasper has set rather high standards for what a marriage could be. Settling for anything less seems inadvisable." Later that evening, after the dancing had concluded, Beatrice and Jasper stood together on the terrace overlooking Lyndhurst Gardens. The late spring air carried the scent of blooming roses and fresh earth. "Do you remember the night at Hartfield House?" Jasper asked softly. "When Felix first approached you about the ferns?" "Of course," Beatrice replied. "I remember thinking it was impossible that someone like him could be interested in someone like me. And now? Now, I understand that he was never the right person, no matter how charming he was. He helped me see myself differently, which was valuable. But you, Jasper, you saw me first. Before I saw myself, before anyone else noticed, you looked at the wallflower and recognized something worth loving." Jasper pulled her closer, an intimacy they could permit now as a married couple. "You were never a wallflower. You were waiting." "For you," Beatrice confirmed, "though I did not know it at the time." "I wasted 2 years watching in silence," Jasper said, the old regret creeping into his voice. "You did," Beatrice agreed. "But those 2 years taught both of us important lessons. You learned that cowardice costs more than courage. I learned that being overlooked was a role I could change. We both needed to grow before we were ready for this." She turned to face him fully, reaching up to touch his face. "We have a lifetime ahead of us, Jasper. A lifetime of working together, building something meaningful, proving that partnerships based on mutual respect and shared purpose can create extraordinary things." "I love you," Jasper said, the words simple truth. "Every day more than the day before." "I know," Beatrice replied. "I see it in how you look at me, how you value my opinions, how you share your life without reservation. And I love you in return with an intensity that still surprises me sometimes." They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other through an unlikely combination of devotion and eventually honest partnership. The future stretched before them, full of challenges and opportunities they would face together. Inside Lyndhurst Hall, the servants were clearing the ballroom and extinguishing candles. In London, society was already discussing the evening's event, noting the Earl's obvious devotion to his wife. And in a townhouse on the other side of London, Lady Constantia Worthington read the declining response to her invitation one more time, and wondered how 6 years of casual cruelty had resulted in such complete social exile. But none of that mattered to the couple on the terrace. They had found something far more valuable than social approval. They had found partnership, purpose, and a love that had grown from careful observation into something transformative and enduring. Years later, when people asked Beatrice about her courtship and marriage, she would smile and offer a carefully edited version of events. She would mention meeting Felix Bainbridge at a ball, developing friendship, and then realizing that his brother Jasper was the man she truly wanted. The schemes would be omitted, replaced with a romantic narrative of love finally recognized. But privately, alone with Jasper in their office, she would admit the truth. That sometimes the best outcomes emerge from flawed beginnings. That being invisible for 6 years made being seen all the more precious. And that marrying the brother who watched in silence rather than the brother who courted with charm had been the rightest decision she ever made. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, resilience, and hope that celebrate how true partnership transforms everything.